Start us off, Calum. Nope, not Carter. Calum show.
You guys were talking about football. Hey, it's a football episode. I'm Carter. We're talking about football.
Dude, you sound just like Carter.
I know.
Hey, what's the big idea, bozo? Take you down to Yancey Street and shove you in a trash can. Get over here. Yeah.
Okay, is this guy good or what? Welcome
Guy
back.
good or what?
See,
Welcome
that's
back
why I
to
need Fantastic
Castpod.
Four to be good, because we really need those memes to just be mainstream, like permanent parts of our discourse.
They're gonna be. Don't worry.
All
But
right.
we're not talking about movies today, and we're not talking about football today. We're talking about and Castpod conservation. So, I wanted to bring this back for a bit. I have many thoughts on this. This is probably the only show where we have any
Intelligent
Actual-
conversation.
knowledge or can back up anything we say.
That's true.
I mean, from like
Our only area of
education
expertise.
background. I don't want to toot our own horn, but Carter and Kevin talk football. Soon to be
Oh,
don't sleep on
Only
football.
educated.
Yes, I subscribe
We
to
do
the
our
New
knowledge.
Yorker of football. What is the New Yorker of football?
Sports
I guess the
Illustrated?
Athletic.
Oh.
I was gonna say Sports Illustrated.
Well, that's more
Picking
that's
up
more
a
the
magazine,
People
it's like,
magazine.
is this guy good or what? And he just puts it back down.
My entire personality now. It's alarming how much a single film has become my personality. But anyway, yes, I don't know why I'm here specifically. I just wanted to be included. It is
Well,
Castpod
you know what?
conservation.
Much like bringing the Fantastic Four franchise back from the dead. That's what we're talking about here.
Look
It's
at
just
that
not
segue.
a segue. Woo.
That was
Ooh,
actually
we
Paul
beautiful.
Blart the way I segue.
Somebody write that down. That's a good one. We're talking about de-extinction. This is a topic that has become more relevant in kind of popular media in recent years. Probably most people would think initially about Jurassic Park. And classic joke, we all know how that went. But there are actually companies and individuals out there who think this is a viable option for bringing species back, because we are in a biodiversity crisis. Many different species around the world are going extinct, and some people would argue that we are in the sixth great mass extinction, although some people would say that we're not, actually, and that could be another topic for another day. But either way, we're seeing a lot of extinction, and people think, well, it's really hard to prevent extinction because we're really bad at changing our ways in any meaningful way. What if we, just after they die, brought them back? And so that's the main idea of de-extinction. It's a process of generating an organism that either resembles or is an extinct organism. And there are a few ways to do this. Obviously, you can clone them, or you can kind of selectively breed things. And so far, cloning, it does exist. It is no longer science fiction. It's been a thing that has existed for a while. It's not used that much because there are ethical concerns around cloning, but we know it is possible. And so people have been going more for like the kind of selective breeding and into gene editing. And the kind of forerunners of this science right now is a company known as Colossal Biosciences. So again, if you've been paying attention to news recently, you've probably seen some articles about the bringing back of the dire wolf by Colossal Biosciences, which has been controversial, I would say. I think to the average person, they see this and they're like, that's neat. I watched Game of Thrones. And then to many in the scientific community are like, this is either A, wrong, or B, stupid, or both. But to give a little background on Colossal Biosciences, this is a fairly recent organization. They've been talking about this idea of bringing species back from extinction for a while, but only recently have they actually made any kind of meaningful headway, at least in the media. This is an organization founded by two main people, one being George Church, who is a Harvard professor in genetics, and Ben Lamb, who is kind of funding the whole project. He is a billionaire who, I must say, has the most like vague Wikipedia page I've ever read, where it just says like he has owned and sold multiple companies. Great, thanks. I know where all of his money comes from now.
Drugs.
Embezzlement.
Probably. He's like
I have
relatively
some.
young.
Well, I have
too.
some thoughts on that, but I'll bite my tongue until your intro's done.
Thank you. So yeah, it's a billionaire and a geneticist who are like, you know what, I think we can do this. And so they have made some moves at de-extincting several species. Some of their biggest like kind of projects that they're working on include like the woolly mammoth, Tasmanian tiger, and obviously the dire wolf. And so today we're just going to kind of talk about the idea of de-extinction because three of us have degrees in conservation biology, and so we have learned several things about conservation and genetics, and have some thoughts about what they're doing. We'll talk a bit more about the details of what their de-extinction process has been, and whether we can even really consider it de-extincting or like a success, and just other general thoughts on the project. So, who wants to make some initial comments about what they think of the idea of conserving species via bringing them back from extinction?
I vote Carter.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say I want to kind of hear what Carter's thoughts are, as we all kind of have,
As the
like you
layman,
said,
as
degrees.
the common
Yes.
swine of the group who thinks not of the complicated factors of the world, but rather just kind of roots around in the slop, as it were. But actually, it's interesting because you bring up the colossal of it all, and like, and maybe I'm just in this headspace because our last Disney Desk episode inexplicably got very political, and it is. For me, I feel like I've had trouble explaining to you guys just kind of my general political stance, and I've just devolved it into, well, in Disney terms, Tomorrowland, but in broader terms, futurist. I am all about, like, again, I'm someone who loved the space race. I'm someone who likes stars. I'm someone who's like very adamant that humanity should prioritize making as many big giant leaps as it can in any given amount of time. However, I also am very, very frustrated with this current political era. And like a part of it is because, again, space has been commodified. The billionaires have turned it into a vanity project. The billionaires have turned it into like, something that strikes me so much is that Bezos finally convinced William Shatner to take one of his ships up into space. And Shatner, and he's talked about it, he was clearly messed up from it. Like he was shaken from like the beauty of it. And then he's trying to have a genuinely human moment with Bezos, and then kind of dawns on him like, oh, this man has no internal life. This man doesn't care about space. He just wants to show off. But I guess the point I'm getting to with this is my love of like pushing science forward, continuing to do things that would have once been thought of as witchcraft by previous generations. Very much like the prefix focusing on whether or not you could element of it is overruled by not trusting the people who are doing it currently. You mentioned that the one member of Colossus's Wikipedia page is very, very vague, and that is kind of run of the mill with any billionaire, frankly. To use Disney terms, Nelson Peltz has basically been fighting a proxy war to take over the company for almost 2 decades now. And famously, there are only like 2 pictures of him that exist. Like a lot of them kind of take pride in being anonymous. Peter Thiel, for example, is very cloistered in his public life, despite having growing influence on our daily life. And yes, the fact that like a theoretical public good, the idea of bringing back species, the idea of we can undo messes we've made through science and undo sort of unfair twists of history and nature and bring them back. Again, as someone who's read a lot about sort of the plight of the bison, of like, that in many ways that's should have been more our national animal than the bald eagle, frankly. But because of a number of policies and approaches, they're almost gone. Like I should be all for this, but unfortunately, we are in an era where I simply cannot trust sort of scientific leaps like that because it is not being used. We're talking ethical science here, I guess. Like, we're not doing it for the betterment of humanity. We're doing it as a vanity project. That's what the direwolf thing was. Hey, someone likes Game of Thrones, let's bring back the wolf from the show.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it is frustrating because I shouldn't have a beef with this. In fact, I'm like, sort of adjacent to it. I am someone who's like very excited at the idea of like sort of cloned beef. The idea of like, one of the fast routes to solving climate change could be radically reducing our sort of cattle population, radically reducing our like beef consumption. Well, not even, like our live beef consumption by making, doing vat copies of it. Like, genuinely, that would be one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history. Like, I should be, by transitive property, I should be all for this, right? Like, I should be all for, hey, we can bring the bison back. We can bring direwolves back. We can bring all of these species who, either had a bad bounce by evolution or had a bad bounce by running into us. But I can't, in good faith, get behind it because, again, the people who are currently behind it are, at best, amoral, at medium, sort of self-aggrandizing, and at worst, sort of
Exploitive.
dangerous. Well, exploitative, dangerous. Yes. Again, like, I think one of the most frustrating things, like in terms of my politics, in terms of my worldview, the most frustrating thing is the people who have taken the mantle of being techno, of not music, mind you, like technologically advanced. Like, the people who have appointed themselves like the gatekeepers of humanity's progress are just the worst fucking people. They are genuinely, like, I highly recommend Fox Media's coverage of Silicon Valley because it really becomes striking how many people kind of talk like that South African who will not be named here, in terms of like, they're always raging about the mind virus. They're always like talking about like, oh, it's our job to like steer humanity. And the minute you start talking like that, science goes from a moral good and an ethical good to a tool of authoritarianism, a tool of manipulation, a tool, like a dangerous tool. Which is me just, I've been bloviating for a good like 5 to 10 minutes here. And I guess all of this is to say I am like a lot of things that I theoretically should support because of my general worldview and my general like interest in seeing the next step of like human progress, of like what we're capable of next. I have to go on the defensive. I have to go against it because if we can't do it right, we can't do it. If we're not doing it for the right reasons, we're just going to get people hurt.
I like it. I like the thought process.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is probably a good general like feeling for a lot of people who have been paying attention to politics right now about like, if billionaires are doing it, it's probably not for us, the average person, right? Like, just that general kind of skepticism of like, why do the richest people in the world feel like doing this thing? There's got to be like more to it. Of they're not being Batman here. They're like,
They're being
they
Lex
just want
Luthor.
more money. Exactly, Lex Luthor. So I thought I would expand a little bit now that we have some background on general populist feelings. To go back to the direwolf, I think Carter kind of hit the nail on the head of like they're exploiting it, they're using it as a source of money because basically, like I said, this company had been talking for a couple of years about trying to make these things happen, do stuff with woolly mammoths and bring back all these different species, but for quite a while they had nothing to show for it. They were just kind of talking about it. And so the first case where they actually kind of made any news was the woolly mice. And I do air quotes, but we're on an audio show, so it doesn't really matter. They created woolly mice, which were these general, like, lab mice, but had long, curly, brown, or like orangish hair. And they were like, see, we took genes of the woolly mammoth. This is what their hair would look like, and we put them into mice. And so now we can see we have those genes available. That was the first thing that came out. Has anybody seen that when it came out initially.
Yes.
Here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And while they are aesthetically pleasing, again, that's kind of what you're getting to. It's like they're not actually doing what they're saying they are. They're just gene splicing. And like, again, and like, I guess also like as someone who at least is moderately spiritual, that gets into a whole like ethical mess for me of like, is it right to do that? You know, it gets a bit eugenics-y for my taste, even if it is just to make cute little mice.
The Rat King has spoken.
Yeah,
That's
well, they're
About
not
his rodent compatriots.
exactly. It's cruel.
Tom, what did you think about the woolly mice when you saw them?
I echo the same thoughts. My interest in this comes in the fact that we are focusing on species that a lot of them did not go extinct as a result of us. So, like, I mean, human, like, all right, so for those of you who don't know, I'm working as a primatology PhD, so I'm taking a lot of classes on, like, early hominin. And while there were human ancestors around during the woolly mammoth's time, obviously, like, human-caused climate change wasn't a big thing. The Anthropocene hadn't really officially started. Mass hunting and development weren't a thing. So these creatures just kind of went extinct due to the natural changing climate that we would expect normally. And something that's interesting to me is that most of these proposed projects are for creatures that did not die directly from us. So we're talking about woolly mammoths, charismatic megafauna. I just saw that apparently 3 days ago that Peter Jackson has partnered with Colossal to try and bring the moa back to life, which is a giant bird from, I think
New
I want to say the
Zealand.
Cretaceous.
Oh,
New Zealand, yeah, but I want to say I'm trying to figure out what species
it's,
what part of time, but it's prehistoric.
yeah. It's not even like
And
truly like dinosaur prehistoric. It it
no,
just
it's like
happened to go
around
extinct when the Maori started showing up.
right. So it's again not a creature that like we are like it's the economy of my research here has been looking this up prior to this recording and also scrolling through Instagram and seeing that, the last northern white rhino actually died like a week ago. Like, even though like they had officially said that the species was dead a while ago because he was the last male, he actually finally died like last week. And it's just interesting to me that, obviously they're planning on doing this for charismatic species because that's what's going to bring in the money, right? Everyone wants to see a T-Rex, everyone wants to see a mammoth or whatever, and not, the passenger pigeon, which humans directly cause the extinction of, right? And yeah, I think to echo Carter's thoughts, it's a money grab, and there is something to be said about trying to garner interest by having some sort of megafauna to start off with, but like the moa, like, like
Bold choice.
yeah, bold choice. First of all, there's in Halo Reach, there's things called MOAs, and when I was a kid, I played that game and thought they just made them up because it was like an alien game, and then I realized it was an actual thing, and like nobody, like I don't know if anybody in my life who I could say, you know what a MOA is, that didn't go to like school with us, they'd be like, yeah,
Right.
But there's also the consideration that these creatures may not be, as close as they want to get to cloning them. I mean, a lot of these are probably just going to be bred to look like them, and I'm sure we'll get into discussing that too. But a lot of like what happened after the meteor struck and killed the dinosaurs, a lot of that wasn't from the impact, but from the atmosphere changing. And with the way we've been changing the atmosphere, with the albedo effect, loss from melting sea ice, and greenhouse gases trapping solar radiation, the likelihood that a lot of these creatures will even be able to survive, given the optimal, conditions, is slim to none. And if we're just bringing back one or two, we're not creating a breeding population. So there's no way that this is going to turn into a real population that could be released into the wild, especially if there's these limits to what environments it can be in. And just to finish off, at that point, are we just trying to make Jurassic Park? Are we just trying to make a prehistoric zoo that'll get shut down in 10, 12 years when the animals we brought back from millions of years ago die instead of focusing on the ones that we just finished killing off.
Mm-hmm. I think you make some great points there. A lot of them were points that I was planning on bringing up. For one,
Sorry.
no, that's like good because it gets us rolling into that conversation. Like, for one, when a lot of these species went extinct is definitely very relevant. You know, like you said, the white rhino, that's within our lifetime, very recently within our lifetime, versus the woolly mammoth going extinct, estimated around like 4,000 to 10,000 years ago. The dire wolf going extinct to like around 10,000 years ago as well.
Thylacine went extinct in the
Versus, like,
1930s.
yeah, some more recent for sure.
Yeah.
But that's a topic that a lot of people talk about in conservation is, you know, when we're trying to, say, like, rewild an area or bring an area that, you know, like, whether it's a protected area or an area that's being turned into protected area, what is the goal for the flora and the fauna and the general ecosystem? What are we trying to bring it back to with like reintroduction programs and stuff like that? And a lot of people would say kind of like pre human times, pre Anthropocene kind of situation. And a lot of times that's just not viable because of, like you said, with climate change, how many, you know, different factors relating to the temperature and the humidity and, you know, even like soil content and the organisms that still exist. How possible is that? It really isn't. And so bringing back species that were even pre that, you know, going into the Holocene and earlier is like, what are we bringing them back to? Doesn't make much sense. The other thing that you mentioned was that, yeah, are we actually bringing these species back? Or are we bringing back things, not even bringing back, we're just making things that look like them? Because that is kind of the main criticism that people have had over Colossal and their projects is they're not bringing anything back. They are just making something new that kind of looks like the old thing. So with the woolly mice, they had kind of made the claim that they're like, oh, these are genes from a woolly mammoth, but they're not. They're genes that exist within mice that have just kind of been either selectively bred or gene edited through CRISPR to look that way. Because this is kind of what woolly mammoths look like. So what if we just made their hair longer and brown? And that's what they did. And then with the dire wolf as well, they kept saying, we brought back the dire wolf. We brought this species back. But most geneticists, evolutionary biologists would say, no, they didn't. They took gray wolves, they edited their genes so that specific things that kind of looked like how we assume dire wolves to have looked would be the same. So, like, kind of overall bigger body size, certain hair coloring condition, the size of their ears, various like morphological aspects like that. They changed it so that it's like, yeah, this is kind of what it looked like. But at the end of the day, it's a gray wolf with edited genes. And so that was brought up over and over and over and over and over by many different scientists. And Colossal Biosciences actually responded to that of being like, no, we did bring them back because they look like dire wolves, and we're using the morphological species concept, like definition, which, if you don't know, the concept of species is really complicated. What is a species? How do you distinguish different species? And there are a bunch of different definitions for that. There's like the evolutionary definition, the genetic definition, and the list goes on. But the morphological species concept is just, if two things look like they are the same, then they are. And if they look different, then they're two different species. And so because they say that these gray wolves with their edited genes look like, again, probably what a dire wolf would have looked like, then they are dire wolves. Which I think most people would be like, that doesn't make sense at all. I mean, we've gone very far away from using morphology to differentiate species. It's still something people use, but that's not it. Like, you look at their genetics, you look at their ecology, you look at all of these different aspects, and morphology is just part of it. The only kind of organisms that we still differentiate their species based purely on their morphology would be fossils, because we don't have genetic material to compare. And so there would just be no way to differentiate any like prehistoric species without that. But when we had the genetics, you know, you're just purposefully ignoring that in order to show your investors like, hey, we've got some products here, so like keep giving us money so we can keep doing this, even though what is it really going to get us to?
It's the
Well-
can I copy your homework but change it a little thing?
100%.
Yeah.
Why are you calling me?
Well, and I suppose what I can contribute to this conversation is like too much time reading about Silicon Valley and talking to people adjacent to Silicon Valley. And what I would say is like, to what end? Well, you're saying like, well, it's not actually a direwolf. But here's the thing, the average congressman doesn't know that. And ultimately, what a lot of these vanity projects are about is just contracts. Like, that's the holy grail for... It's so funny, they call themselves disruptors, but in reality, they want to be the in-group. They just want to be the ones... I think the best quote I've ever heard about people like this is from a YouTuber named Folding Ideas. And he just was like, the disruptors of Silicon Valley, like that entire sort of tech group, they saw the financial crisis of 2008, saw like the disaster that a handful of powerful people brought, and their takeaway wasn't, we should build something better. It was, well, shouldn't I be the boot? I'm smarter than them. I should be in charge. And yeah, like, you know, you guys who like study this and me who reads a lot can correctly identify that that's not a direwolf, but the average congressman is going to see a buzzy headline. Sorry, as a vacuum goes over my head, Jesus. Sees a flashy headline and thinks these are the kind of people we get in league with. You know, the mistaking any kind of science as inherently good and progressive, and that's how you get into a situation where we like basically completely lose NASA to private equity. Like, and here's the thing: SpaceX is not any closer to getting men into orbit as they've been for the last decade. They've been getting money. Like, Colossus is no more close to actually making a dire wolf than they are as they like put a coat of paint over a regular wolf. But the money is flowing in, the influence is flowing in, and their ability to sway both public opinion and legislation has increased. I mean, I think to do an adjacent example that's affecting the art industry on my end is, yeah, you know, we really tried to impress upon people that like, you know, AI art, AI, like, you know, all of these little like AI animations would lead, you know, were like the, you know, accidentally letting a vampire into your bar. And now OpenAI is got a contract with the military, and the implications of that are horrifying. And ultimately, that is kind of what Colossal's end game kind of is, of like selling their genetic sort of abilities to Congress, you know, to the government, basically, or whatever government will pay for them, because now they're in the news, and that gets you audience.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like the average person isn't going to realize those differences. They're just going to be like, that's cool. That sounds cool. I like that. And for sure, yeah, people that are in power or have money that can kind of invest into them, they're going to see that as well and be like, yeah, no, let's do more of that actually. And the last thing I want to say, kind of just on the general subject before we get into some of Kevin's points that he has, is that, you know, there's a lot of different conservation implications in here. Like I could honestly go on about this topic forever, because there's so much that goes into this. Like, you know, bringing back the habitat to a point that it would sustain them, and we're not actually bringing back the right species, and, you know, just gene editing in general and how kind of ethical that is. But the main thing is, because this is getting so much public attention, it is taking away from other conservation priorities and projects and funding. Because if, you know, already in the US, to not get too political, this is going to be political anyways, but science in general is being defunded, at least in the US. Like NSF and so many other organizations that give funding to projects involved in conservation and any kind of science are being kind of muted, with these banned words, and they're like, the funding is being cut, people are being fired. We're losing money like crazy. But with a project like this, even more so, that's going to continue happening because now that people see, at least quote unquote, see that it is an option, that we can take these species that have been dead for thousands of years and just, do a little gene editing and boom, they're back. Any project involving like, let's protect these species, let's make protected areas, let's put them on an endangered species list, people aren't going to care, and they're not going to want to fund that because they're like, well, what's the point? Like, that costs a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of people. Why don't we just bring them back in the lab? Like, and so I think that's kind of the biggest negative implication for conservation that this brings up.
Mm-hmm. You're basically describing also the argument for geoengineering.
Yeah.
If we wait till the 11th hour, it's fine.
It has a big reach in a lot of different aspects. And now Kevin has prepared a few things. And so I want to give the floor to Kevin so you can give us some more discussion topics. We've probably touched on a bit already.
Yeah, so, I mean, you pretty much nailed that sentence in the head. Because, I have a couple of questions and, like, a list of species. Like, things that it's, like, there are active projects with. Because we talked about, like, the MOAs and Peter Jackson doing that. We mentioned things like dire wolves and mammoths and thylacines. But there's also, like, a lot of other things. Like the northern white rhino, Yangtze giant soft-shell turtles, dodos, cave lions, things like that, where it's just, what is the threshold of too extinct to return? Because, like, I mean, we all see it with Jurassic Park, where it's like, we can't kill a T-Rex with a gun. We need a flare and prayers. But it's
and
also
Spinosaurus.
Yeah, there's Spinosauruses too. But it's also like the concept that we've dabbled with throughout this episode so far of, like, the environment is very much not the same. If you look at just the advances in human technology for the last 100 years, so 1925, what has happened? World wars, all sorts of different chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, air travel, things like that. Oil, burning oil, things like that. It's just like, we've dramatically changed the environment and the atmosphere over just the last 100 years alone. So, like, what is that threshold of, like, yeah, you're too extinct, we can't feasibly keep you alive. If we were to truly bring back your, like, a pure MOA or a pure direwolf, like, we built a time machine, we grabbed one, we took it back to modern day. How far back can we go where it won't just die on arrival?
It's funny that this is actually shockingly relevant to the latest Jurassic World movie.
I figured.
I'm not going to go into the details of it, but there are some points where they kind of talk about this. For me, I would say that it has to be within, like, probably the last couple hundreds of years. And I say this because there are actually examples, technically, of de-extinctions that have been, or at least that have happened. Most of them dealing with plants, where they kind of find, like, not fossilized, but preserved seeds and managed to kind of bring those back. And the farthest one I could see was around, like, the 1400s. It was kind of the oldest thing that they've managed to bring back. The majority of stuff that they really, like, de-extinct was going extinct, I'd say, like, in the 1900s, 1800s. So that would be my argument. I think anything coming, like, at least from Colossal, it seems like the farthest back they're going is around like 10,000 years ago. So I guess they're trying to keep it around like kind of early human, when we started to kind of like travel around the world and start impacting more ecosystems. But I just don't think that's possible with what we're doing now. If we were to take climate change more seriously as a whole, I think we could reverse the current climate conditions somewhat. But to bring it back to like kind of immediate post ice age, I don't think that's really doable.
I would agree. I think, I mean, for sure, anything after about like 1860, I think the Industrial Revolution really skyrocketed
damage,
the
yeah.
carbon, the CO2 emissions for the globe, and so much so that it's like astronomically more change in that time span than over the entirety of human history prior to that point. And so something that went extinct after that time, I think, and if we're talking about atmosphere and atmospheric toxicity and concentrations of things like oxygen in the atmosphere, because, you know, when we're talking about like 65 million years ago, I know Colossal is not there yet, but, you know, like a dinosaur, even if Jurassic Park was real, and, you know, it wouldn't be able to survive because a lot of them required a higher oxygen concentration in the air than we have today. And, you know, even things that were, you know, 10,000, 5,000 years old, it's a very different world. Even something that's aquatic that could theoretically go to cooler waters to escape from temperature, you have to think about ocean acidity and nitrification from dumping of waste into the ocean, which has drastically increased nitrate levels. So I would suggest probably within the last 300 years, maybe 200. I know that's a little more conservative than what Calum was speaking of, but coming from somebody who's looking at how the climate is directly impacting things now and how rapidly it's changing just from year to year, I don't think that anything prior to that point, aside from maybe like plants, like Calum was saying, unless they're being held in like some sort of zoo or high-tech facility where certain concentrations of atmospheric gas can be held, then no. And at that point, if you're just holding them there, then what's the point? Because you're not going to reintroduce them. You know, you're just going to keep them in your basement.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I think I agree that like you have to look at the past, but also the future of like if we're letting climate change progress, like a lot of the species that exist right now won't be able to exist. So yeah, probably the ones in the past aren't either.
Yeah.
Which sucks, but you know, what are you gonna do?
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah. All right. So
No worries, but it turns out it was all worries.
So let's move to a theoretical situation where you can bring something feasibly back. Because this is kind of going off of Tom's points a little bit. He touched on a hint, but I feel like this could be a fun deep dive. Of like he mentioned they'll be kept in scientific facilities or zoos and stuff. But in the theoretical sense, say you're able to bring back 10 of any species, doesn't matter which one, and you can reintroduce them to their own like original biome, home region, whatever you want to call it. Do you think they would be able to outcompete? I mean, obviously depending on their things, but outcompete other members of their niche, or like and have like a limited impact. So, for example, let's go with. I'm trying to think of what is gone extinct semi-recently. Let's go with the thylacine, because it's been extinct for just shy of 100 years now.
It's the Tasmanian tiger, for those who don't
yes. know. So it's like, so that one is like, it is gone. it lived in Tasmania and some parts of Australia, and their role has been pretty much filled as there is new alphas of the ecosystem, new things that can take down non-invasive species. So, if do you think they would be able to theoretically outcompete to like a limited impact where they could still sustain as well as the new apex predator of their biome, or do they just become invasive because prey creatures have evolved enough and learned enough over that short time that they've been extinct, but have had generations upon generations to like that they would the introduced species is just basically adding an invasive species.
I don't know. I think the one important variable would be is the assumption that if these species are reintroduced to their natural habitats, what is the impact of humans on them? Like, would they be protected so that, like, because when it comes to the Tasmanian tiger, their extinction is pretty closely related to humans in that they were hunted by local farmers because the Tasmanian tigers were supposedly eating their livestock, which now they argue that they actually didn't really do that much. But if we're saying that like they are protected, so humans can't just re-hunt them to extinction, I would say that they would probably do a pretty good job of fitting back into the ecosystem and being a positive influence. Because honestly, it hasn't been that long that they've been taken out of the environment. And so I don't think the only thing that really fills their niche would be other introduced species like dingoes or introduced cats and dogs and things like that. They're kind of the main predator of those environments. And now we kind of have a similar situation as with wolves in the US, where the environment has adapted somewhat to exist without them, but not really. I mean, that's the reason that we have like deer cullings so often, is because the prey species just kind of explode without that impact from an apex predator. And so in the way that when wolves were reintroduced back into areas in the western US, and how that kind of solved a lot of the ecosystem problems, getting elk back down to kind of a normal level, and also helping with erosion because the elk aren't beating up the ground so much so that rivers are flowing better and beavers are coming back. Everybody's seen the clip of that whole influence of wolves. I think it would have a pretty similar impact with the Tasmanian tigers, that they would kind of bring balance to the world, per se.
Okay, let's pivot a little bit to something a little bit like more ancient with the giant moa. We're reintroducing an incredibly large bird into the ecosystem.
Peter Jackson should just make movies, but this is what he's interested in now, I guess.
Listen, he likes the big bird, okay? He's always
Look, all right, but it's very
They
clear
could've
now
just
that the
flew
Hobbit
on the
fucked
Eagles
him
the
up.
entire way.
Let's just be honest about this.
So I'd like to hop in here and talk about the idea of invasive species on other invasive species. So, like what Calum was saying with this Tasmanian tiger, right? Like how that predator niche has been filled by other predators such as wild dogs, dingoes, cats, even. We have to think about how something like Tasmanian tiger would react to those creatures, because like a Tasmanian tiger could theoretically, even if he's outcompeted in hunting the prey he's used to hunting, he could be hunting the invasive cats that are now in the area, or the invasive dingoes that are out in the area. And with something as big as a moa, we could be seeing that as well. And again, that goes into the idea of, would this thing be able to even survive based on how the atmosphere is working right now? But all I'm saying is the Moa is kind of like an anomaly in the fact that it's a lot longer ago that they're trying to bring this thing back. And even looking at these posts, they're talking about it being a long shot, right? Like as this Hail Mary pass, and yeah, I guess they need Peter Jackson's money for. But I think given the amount of space that humans have taken up, like regardless of if they could survive our atmosphere, would they be able to even have territories? Like, would they be able to survive in a viable population that is not bottlenecked and is not inbreeding? Like 10 individuals can go far, but not if there's not enough space for or enough resources for those mothers to get enough food to nurse their offspring, for them to have more than enough offspring to more than supplant themselves, right? Because then at that point we're either decreasing or just having the same amount of numbers. So I think there is an argument to be made that the longer you go back, the more you risk that animal not having the resources it needs because of how long ago it's been since that ecosystem had it there, right? So like Thylacine, 1930s.
30s.
It's like
9, I think.
Okay, so that's like 100 years, give or take. That's still a long time, but it's not, 10,000 years ago. Everything's changed since then. And I know I brought this up already, but the idea of the Industrial Revolution and what it did for the chemical composition of our atmosphere and oceans and water and soil, like Calum mentioned, and plants that grow out of that soil is so different that the nutrients that these creatures might need might not even. There's no guarantees. That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see. All right. Let's go with this one. So there's the selective breeding, but kind of the reverse pug scenario where you're trying to do instead of going for these weird desirable quote unquote traits, you're going to go for the more rustic traits, aka backbreeding. That's that term. Fun fact. And
That's horrifying.
yeah. There's also genome editing and in vitro fertilization of modern animals that are similar enough. What do you think would work best with kind of trying to recreate these species? Do you want to go with something very close genetically? Do you want to go with something that's very morphologically similar? Do you want to go for something that fills a similar role so it can be introduced into the environment? Because for example, with the Tasmanian tiger, one of the closest things genetically to it, and they are actively using it to try and fill in to bring it back, is the fat-tailed Dunnart. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but for those of you playing along at home, it looks like a quokka. Those cute smiley guys from Australia mixed with a kangaroo rat. And it had a very, a handheld sized baby. That's what they look like. So it's that's the closest thing, but morphologically and at a niche capacity, nowhere similar.
It's like the idea of bringing back even like a T-Rex. Everyone thinks that you would use an ostrich, but they're more closely related to chickens.
Yeah.
So it's I guess it depends on what we're defining it, because colossal is very clearly defining it on a morphological scale.
Correct.
Now, if we're going based on that, I would just go with the one that looks the most like it. I think people are going to gravitate towards size and, again, a lot like Jurassic Park, size, teeth, charismatic features. So for something like the Moa, I would say the ostrich. It's the biggest bird. It's the closest morphologically, I would think. Maybe an emu, but emus are slightly smaller. But
they are related as well. They're all ratites, I believe.
Correct.
Yes, they are. I guess, but on my genetic scale, I tend to define species genetically. And that's led to a lot of different speciation. Even the lemurs I'm focusing on now are a recent speciation event because they finally got DNA data on the gray mouse lemur and realized that this group is separate. And so all the things from their vocalizations to their patterns and home ranges are different. And if you just looked at them, you probably wouldn't be able to tell that because they look like two little cute little fuzzy guys. But they're actually a lot different. So if by some miracle genetic reintroduction of these species was possible and we could get something that wasn't just looking like it, I would say, yeah, again, I would go back to what's most closely related genetically, because I would imagine that doing something like CRISPR would take less money, because I imagine this costs millions of dollars, right?
Oh, yeah. This is in a world where money is no object.
Money doesn't exist here.
We're all billionaires here.
We're talking about time.
We spared no
time travel.
expense.
But yeah, I would say that going to the source of the genetic code and figuring out which of those species is most related, so that it would take the least amount of modification. And again, like, that's not really how genes work. It's not like you can just take something. It's not like Jurassic Park. I know we keep bringing that up, but it's not like you could just take something from amber and be like dino DNA and put it into an egg and it turns into a raptor. It's like, it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah, they talk about mixing it with like frog DNA and iguana DNA to make it.
Right,
just
and that always
theoretically
bothered me
viable.
because I'm just like, if that was true, like, they would create some sort of Lovecraftian horror monster that would die on birth. It would just be like this blob of frog flesh and teeth.
Shout out to the latest movie.
Especially since we now know that dinosaurs are more related to birds than they are reptiles. Well, most of them are.
Cause,
I want to build off that for. Oh, go on.
I was gonna say, because like that's making an argument where we're using the DNA of the last known thylacine was named Benjamin. Fun fact. He also died on my birthday. Fun fact with Kevin. But that's like, so we're trying to mix. So like Tom, you're saying we're trying to mix that DNA with something that fills no similar roles, looks nothing like it morphologically, and
right. I mean,
that
this
would
is
create
this
a better
is,
success because their closest genetic relatives are Dunarts, Numbats, these small little insectivores at most violent creatures.
Right. It wouldn't be. This is assuming that we're not trying. I guess I'm making the assumption that we're not. That these species are not going to be viable enough to have a population of their own, because of them being thrown into this niche that they're not familiar with.
Yeah.
So in my mind, if we're trying to make, what the critics of this process are calling like the actual clone of this, then we should take what's closest related and then just continually mess with the genes until we get. It's going to take. It would. It would not
this
be
is a
in our
process
lifetime.
of
It would be thousands
generations.
of years.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not. And at that point, is that even worth it? Like, that's so much work for something that your great grandkids are going to say they saw a moa before it died 30 seconds after it was born.
Hey,
Like,
there is for certain types of cognac, the alcohol, how they make it is it has like 100-year-old aging time. So the master brewer that puts it into the barrel will never taste it as a finished product. Their next generation will.
Right, but we're not talking about like my grandkids. We're talking about
but
ancestors,
it's a process that's been happening for
I don't doubt it.
hundreds of years.
But I'm just like, is it worth it?
That's the question at hand. Have you had cognac?
I think it's not. Well, cognac maybe it's worth it for cognac. I don't think it's worth it to bring the moa back. I'm just gonna throw that out there. I love the thylacine, but are we real? Like, is it worth it? All that money could be going to conserving, what's actually dying right now, and that's obviously, harder because people would rather, use the magic of science to undo mistakes that actually weren't theirs in the first place, like the extinction of the moa and the mammoths, instead of trying to save things like the northern white rhino or, stop Kitrid or any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to get political.
That is very political, but that's just the way it is. To talk about the genetics a bit more, it comes back again to that: how do you define a species? In that, if we were to try and bring back any of these species, we kind of need their genetic material. Whether it is, in my opinion, the best possible route, at least with our current technology, would be we would need to clone them. At least initially, we would need genetic material from an actual example of that species in order to kind of sequence their entire genome. And that's how cloning goes: is you take the genome of one creature, you use in vitro fertilization to put it into the egg cell of an adult of preferably that same species, and then pops out the clone of that original organism. And so that's what we would need to do at the very least. And then if we wanted to then use CRISPR to maybe edit the genes of a closely related organism to try to make more kind of genetic diversity. Because again, species, not only can they not exist if there aren't enough individuals, but if there's not enough genetic diversity within those populations, because then that's how you get to inbreeding. They're just not going to survive long term. And so we're getting better at getting more DNA from things that we didn't think we could get DNA from before. There's, ancient DNA that people work with where they're looking at organisms that died hundreds of years ago, and managing to squeeze some DNA out of what little tissue they have left. Just recently, people are talking about finding examples of collagen in dinosaur fossils, which is shocking. Nobody thought that kind of material like that could persist such long periods, or make it through the fossilization process. So we're making more discoveries. We're getting closer to being able to get genetic material from these older species, but I think that's really the only route that we have in order to get something that is genetically, by definition, that species. Because otherwise, even if we are gene editing to get them to look how we think is correct, which that gets into the talk of paleo art, and are representations of these species even accurate? I don't know. We're just not getting the result that we're actually looking for by doing that. And when we talk about using closely related species and editing their genes, it reminds me of one of my favorite little anecdotes from our wildlife conservation class in college, which was about the Florida Panthers, not sports related, but
nice reference. I'm glad you know that reference.
See, I listen to episodes sometimes.
You're learning. Well, they're a hockey team. They're not a
We've
football
barely
team.
talked about hockey.
He didn't say football. He said sports.
He did
I
say
said
sports, but we've barely talked about hockey. Should we get into hockey,
Yeah.
Carter?
Oh.
Playoff hockey really is the best playoff sport. Because it's just once you get teams who are really good at skating and they lock in, it's actually a beautiful game.
I will
So
say
tense.
I think hockey is my favorite sport to watch because it's so so quick,
When
and
it's
so violent.
yeah.
My dad also.
And when you
liked it a
have
lot.
two teams that are really, really good, it's like soccer. It's the beautiful game.
Plus, there's a
But-
mascot named Gritty. How much?
Exactly.
How much else
And
you want?
there's punching that's legal. Anyway, continue, Cal.
So keep your eye out for that. But yeah, the Florida panther, which is a subspecies of mountain lion, kind of restricted to the Florida Everglades, they have been in decline for quite a while. And now the situation is that there are so few individuals left that they are inbreeding. And so they're really probably not going to survive much longer without any interventions. And so the question was, well, we don't have more Florida panthers anywhere to kind of insert into the population and get more genetic diversity, more individuals for them to breed. So what do we do? And so the idea was, well, we'll import some other mountain lions from other parts of the U.S. where they're more common. Because again, in the eastern U.S., northeast U.S., they've been extirpated for quite a while. The only times you see mountain lions getting into the eastern part of the U.S. is because one from the west was pushed so very far out of its habitat that it just kind of ends up here. We'll just take some of those, bring them to Florida. They're going to breed with the Florida panthers there, and then boom, their population is saved. But then again, there's subspecies. They're different subspecies. So even the definition of subspecies is even more difficult to kind of determine than regular species. Genetically, do we still have Florida panthers? Do they still deserve the same conservation protections if genetically these aren't even the same animals? They're hybrids. They're like just kind of weirder other mountain lions from other parts of the U.S. And I think you would get into that same situation with de-extincting some of these other species by mainly using closely related species and just kind of editing their DNA. Is like, yeah, again, have we actually brought them back, or are we just kind of messing with the genetics of various other species to be like, this is cool, right? Like that we can do this, and like, yeah, it is cool, but why are we doing that? So, yeah, I would say cloning is the best chance we have, but as of right now, for most species, we're not capable of doing that. Something like the white rhino, which again is the northern white rhino, again is the using a subspecies and then using like the southern white rhino as a surrogate for in vitro fertilization. It's like, is it the same? We would have to use something that we actually have genetic material for in order to do that, to clone them. But then,
Now, I did see that they have genetic material for two pure northern white rhinos, both female and male.
Yeah.
They collected samples, but if they use both egg and sperm from northern white rhinos, but the surrogate is a southern white rhino, how much does the gestation period impact the change, or do you believe it impacts the change of
I believe it
what it would be?
I believe it should not impact it, because the what you would be doing if you had an egg cell from the northern white rhino and you're implanting it into the southern white rhino, as far as I know about development, that would not impact the genetic code of the offspring, because you're not using an egg cell from the southern white rhino, which would then be half of its DNA. So it should be kind of a quote unquote purebred northern white rhino that is just birthed via the southern white rhino. But again, that only works if it's you're getting genetic material from both parents there.
Okay, let's pivot that a little bit. So you have let's go to the cave lion. So I don't know how much you guys know about the cave lion, but it is basically a giant feline, not canine, that lived in like the tundras of Russia and stuff like that, and an absolutely unit of an animal. They've found relatively decent samples being thawed in the permafrost of the species. I believe the closest, or some of the closest relatives are modern day lions and tigers. Size wise, I believe it's closest to a Siberian tiger, but I haven't checked up on that in recent months, basically. Lions and tigers have very different nurturements from their parents. Lions are very, what is it when they live in groups? Gregarious? Is that right? Or is that peaceful? I don't know. But yeah, lions are social animals. Tigers, very much solitary. Do you think that the nature versus nurture argument with these animal surrogates, because like with human surrogates, you can teach it about cultures or religions or whatever. Like that concept is like regardless of your own. That concept's very clear. But in the animal kingdom, you're not going to teach it your own nature and nurture. You're going to teach it your instincts.
Yeah, lion and tiger Jesus are wildly different.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, using cave lion, a social creature, do you think, how big of an impact do you think it would be if you if you put the zygote in a lion versus a tiger? Where a tiger is more closely related to its region, but a lion is more closely related to it on a social level and behavioral level.
That's a tough one for me, because I think the study of animal behavior in general is it's very interesting. I like it a lot, but I do think it can be fairly subjective at times. Um, just like the way we observe behavior and how we understand like how organisms learn certain behaviors. Uh, nature versus nurture is very complicated, and so that is an interesting subject that like not a lot of people bring up. Is like not only are we getting the genetics and the morphology right, but like what is its behavior going to be, and is it going to interact with its environment in a
Like it
way that
should,
it
theoretically.
previously would? Yeah. um that's really tough, I think. um yeah, it definitely depends on like the kind of behavior that it's used to, like you said, like a social versus more solitary kind of animal. And like I it's hard to say without like solid evidence, but my feeling would be that general things like that of having this kind of instinct to group up with other organisms versus um, wanting to be more solitary is kind of ingrained in their DNA. It's not a very scientific way of saying that, but like um, I think we can see that with other organisms. Say like, yeah, obviously domestic dogs are super edited
Yeah,
on their own. They're not really like wild animals, but
they're not wild anymore.
If you let a dog out into the world, um, it meets up with other dogs. There is this kind of,
Social
you know,
component.
there's a social component. Even if they've never interacted with other dogs before, they were taken straight from birth, given to a family, never interacted with another dog. There kind of is just like a social aspect to it, where maybe they're more cautious of being around other dogs, but I think they would have that tendency to want to group up with something. Versus more solitary animals are like, you could have them grow up with other organisms, but like they're still going to want their space. They'll be more territorial and things like that. So at least in that instance, I think that probably wouldn't be affected based on the parenting style. But when it comes to other behaviors, I don't know. I think Tom would probably have more to say about this.
Put me on the spot, making me sound like some sort of expert.
I'm just
What are you
saying the
going to
organisms you
school
study
for
have
1,000 years
like
for then?
way
Uh,
more
yeah, you're
behavioral
right.
things going on than like what I see.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I mean, I do agree that there is some sort of inherent, like we're talking about nature versus nurture. If these animals were birthed from, surrogate species, will we be housing them with that surrogate family? Would they have like the paternal instinct to take care of it? If we're not doing that, a lot of that instinct from that surrogate would not be passed down because of behavioral, like, framing the word, but it's like behavioral plasticity. Um, so, that's another thing to consider is whether this creature has the ability to adapt its behavior over its lifetime, or if it's, essentially genetically programmed to be like a very niche kind of hunter and or gatherer or whatever it does to get food and reproduce, which are its main goals. Speaking from my own experience, we haven't done that with primates, but I used to work at some place where we housed primates, and we would house different species together because of like, their compatibility in terms of territoriality and what situation they were in prior to being at the rescue center. And a lot of that had to do with what the mentality of that species was. So, like for example, the ring-tailed lemurs, especially the ones we had there because they were housed in poor conditions, were more hesitant to accept others, not only of different species, but others outside their own family group. So each ring-tailed lemur group was only comprised of the parents and the siblings that were born from those parents. And it's different for each species. Now, when we're talking about something like the thylacine, or the cave lion, not the thylacine, there's a distinction between whether we're trying to idealize the behavior, the looks, the instincts. Like, we kind of need to decide that ahead of time. And there is sort of this stochasticity. Like, there's no guarantees in any of this. Like, you could have a cave lion be born to a lion group, have the lion group take care of it as an infant, have the adult lions think it was their baby, teach them, I mean, it is their baby, but like think it's their species, teach them how to hunt in a pride and what their role is. There's still a chance that when that individual reaches sexual maturation, that its instincts to go off on its own and find a mate, or not stay with the pride or not defend pride mates because it doesn't see that as part of its social grouping. It doesn't see that as a kin selection thing because it's not the same species. Like, there's chemical receptors that we have to think about. Like, will this species even identify itself as one of them if it smells different? Hormones, etc. So all this to say that something like the cave lion, I think it's less important whether we do lion versus tiger in terms of surrogate species, and more so how strong those instincts of it being a cave lion, like what are the instincts of it being a cave lion and how ingrained are those in its DNA, because there's differences. So something like a cat, its instincts are to cover its droppings, right? And that's a survival instinct because it is covering its scent and covering the fact that it was in an area. If it's trying to hunt something, they don't want the prey smelling the or the smell of the cat. They don't want to, or they will pee on a tree on purpose and not cover it up to mark territory. Meowing is something that has developed in cats because of human domestication. It's something that they do because they know they get a response out of it, usually us giving them food or attention. It's not an instinct. It's a learned behavior that has now been passed down through kittens watching, the adult cats do it. I mean, kittens meow and stuff when they're in danger to alert their parents, but it's not like the cute meows that you would see in a house cat, right? And so something like a cave lion, like, what is a meow and what is covering poop, right? So is living in a group a meow, or is living in a group covering poop? We don't know because, no offense, but the people who, even if there were people who were studying animals back then, like, it's not that we didn't know a lot about how behavior was coded in animals. We thought for a long time in the science that it was just an individual basis. There wasn't a genetic component. Then we thought that, the genetics of it predetermined how a species behaves, but then there's individual differences. So there's a lot to go on about.
All right. I got one last question for the class. Do you think there would... Obviously, the hyperfixation on these projects is charismatic megafauna. Or just charismatic species to begin with. The cave lion, the direwolf, mammoths, etc. Do you think there would be a bigger success rate if they chose something, for lack of a better word, less evolutionarily advanced? Your more prehistoric things like fish, like frogs, things to that nature.
Say that again. There's less success.
So like, it's there's the hyperfixation of your charismatic fauna, right?
Right.
That's the projects they want. Well, yeah, but it's typically within the realm of like mammals and birds, which are more. I would call them like evolutionarily advanced. There's more. They've adapted more. They're less prehistoric. Do you think there would be a higher success rate if they stuck to things that are less evolved? I guess is the word I want to say.
I don't think so. I think um, when it comes to like more evolved, less evolved, I don't. I would argue that kind of everything that we see today is as equally evolved in that like they've all evolved to a certain point where we see them now. Um, Even if the changes that we see have been more minor compared to their ancestors, uh, like you look at crocodiles and how crocodiles have existed for millions of years, uh, while some other mammals have only existed for like a couple 100,000 to a million years. Um, the thing is, like, they are all still equally kind of evolved, regardless of how much time or how many changes have occurred. So I think the problems that we've been discussing would still be the same without any knowledge of their genetics. There are species today that look almost identical with wildly different genetics, and stuff that is super variable and different looking and are the same species or even like familiarly related. Um, I think we'd still have these issues of like, because we don't really know anything about their genetics, we are just guessing. And so, yeah, maybe it might be easier to make something where, there are species that exist today with nearly identical features. If we were making like a prehistoric crocodile, all you would need to do, at least from their definition, would be just make a crocodile but bigger. Like just selectively breed crocodiles to be even bigger than they are right now, and boom, prehistoric crocodile. Um, but it's like by the definitions we've been
Breathe these
talking about,
depths.
it's still they're still not doing what you want to do. That would be my argument.
Yeah, I would agree. Um, just to quickly bounce off what Callum was saying. Yeah, like everything, like you would think, and this is a problem in primatology, especially given that primatology is most formally recognized as a division of anthropology, the study of humans, and human ancestors. And I was talking about this with a friend of mine about how primatologists are notably almost always very conceited and like self-important because they think that that the people who are studying bones of ancient hominins are not doing the work as important as saving the endangered gorillas, right? And the constant discussion is like, oh, okay, apes are more evolved, right? But what that really means is that their cranial capacity is higher and their capacity for higher thought is higher than most species. It doesn't mean they're more evolved. It just means that they're closer to humans, and that leads to this self-important idea that humans are the pinnacle of evolution, right? And we don't know that. We don't know that humans are the pinnacle of evolution. We just don't. We are just going based off our own prejudices and bias in saying that. And I would agree with Calum that anything that is alive now is evolved enough to be in this world. And even if they're struggling like with things like climate change, they evolved to be in some state of the world prior to now. And so, what we can talk about is like how far along in their clade they are, but that doesn't necessarily lead to evolutionary adaptability either, because things that, haven't evolved that much in millions of years are still around, like sharks. Whereas, things that have evolved a crap ton may not be, like small mammals, right? So I think that the concept of a more evolved creature has its merit when we're talking about things that don't exist now that compared to things that do. But when we're talking about more evolved or less evolved and, more adept to this, playing field of Earth right now, I think the more accurate term would be adaptability and how behaviorally plastic those species are. Because in a world where the climate is changing so fast that even, in our lifetime, we're seeing whole populations have to move, like that is not enough time for adaptation through evolution to take place in many species, depending on their birth rate and how long gestation is. The mutation rates there is a randomness to mutation because more often than not mutations happen all the time. It's just the 5% that are beneficial are the ones that we see sticking around, right? A lot of the other ones are not beneficial until those individuals die out. So there needs to be a certain amount of leeway in terms of time given to that species so that they can roll the dice and find those few individuals who have the, anti-climate change gene that can then survive what we're doing to the planet.
All right. Yeah. I guess that's the last normal question I have. Are you guys ready for the lightning round?
Lightning round.
Lightning round. All right. Going around the circle, starting with Carter. If you could bring back one extinct animal, what would it be?
Tasmanian tiger.
Good one. Tom.
Passenger pigeon.
Nice. Calum.
The Stellar's dugong.
I hate you. I was going to pick that one. Because they were pretty cool. All right.
Right?
Yeah. Outside of this episode, where can they find you? Carter.
Disney Desk Podcast. We recently did The Secret World of Arietti to celebrate its 15th anniversary, and we have Bug's Life on the horizon.
Tom.
Twitch.tv/KaijuCatcher757.
You should spell that.
KaiJuCat. Shut up. HER757.
Callum.
Calamander on Switch, CALUMAND3R. And also that on Instagram.
And you can listen to me as Kevin and Carter explain football is now dead and don't sleep on football is how Shun rise from its ashes like a phoenix. And Castpod Conservation possibly making a return series? Question mark?
Yeah,
I just gotta think of some topics.
I've had a few topics written down for a while I've been meaning to get to, and just in general, in Castpod and other things, I'd like to start doing some more stuff. So yeah, let's get some more stuff out.
Alrighty. Carter said they're talking about Bug's Life next. Tom, what's the next thing you're streaming?
Probably Endless Ocean Luminous or Donkey Kong Country 3. But we'll see. I also have to finish Madagascar for the GameCube, and then we'll move on to something else, probably another Pokemon Nuzlocke.
Nice. Calum, what's this next episode of Castpod Conservation going to be about?
The next episode is going to be, he clicks on the conservation part. Cool
title, I love it.
I wanted to do an episode about my trip to the Galapagos and talk about how I think that's one of the best examples of conservation in action.
No, brother, he wants to brag.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my god.
This guy
And also, I had
stinks.
ideas for talking about taxonomic revisions, going more into the definition of species and collecting specimens in the wild, and how there's controversy around whether people think we should still be doing that.
I think we should do an episode on the downfall of Animal Planet. But
I wanted to do kind of like a sub one about more specifically Jeff Corwin, but I am down for that.
Alrighty.
Listen, I can only see pit bulls and parolees so many times on the on the schedule.
I like
Not that I pay one more.
I like how I can watch Treehouse Masters on Animal Planet.
Dude, Pete Nelson, yes.
No, you're
Oh, I mean, no.
All
Calum,
right.
you're working for the enemy.
Callum, send us home.
Thank you, everybody, so much for listening to Castpod Conservation. We hope you like it. And if you did, you can show us by liking the video and commenting and telling us what you want to hear about. Because we have quite a few ideas, but I'm always open to more stuff, especially in the conservation field. I mean, I'm still in school for a reason. I like talking about it. So let us know what you want to hear. Subscribe, and we will see you next time.